Hello everyone, welcome back to the Christ MotoGP podcast, Argentina preview. I'm joined by Lewis Duncan. Pete is off enjoying himself and he's getting ready for the week ahead. Argentina, Lewis, it's not an odd place for a Grand Prix. It usually I think good decent races around here. You've had great battles in the past with Marquez and Rossi, that crazy race in 2018 with Crutchlow winning it, and obviously Marquez kind of going rogue that he done. But it's a track that usually is favourable to Marc Marquez, but we have seen a variety of winners around here, especially in recent times with Marco Bezzecchi and Elisa Spargaro. What are we expecting head into this weekend?
Much the same as Thailand, to be honest with you. I think you look at the past in Argentina, you look at the riders who've generally been quite quick there, especially in recent times. It's the two Marquez brothers. You look at it, the last time that Marc raced there was 2019, and he won by almost 10 seconds over Valentino Rossi. After 2 or 3 laps, he was 2 seconds clear. This is one of these types of tracks where maybe the layout not so much, but very much the condition of the track is always dirty. It's an always dirty track. It doesn't get used very much at all, and we haven't been there for a couple of years either. So we're turning up to conditions ideal to Marc Marquez. You're looking, as a reference, Aragon last year, that kind of dirty track, and the natural instinct from Marc with his feel for grip takes over, and it's going to be hard for the others to beat him. I think that's I don't want to kind of put a negative spin on it, but it will be very, very hard to beat him. He's got that first weekend out the way now in Thailand. He's done the win. He's kind of got over that first kind of initial set of nerves and expectation, and now he knows what he can do on that bike, and he's going to be a bit more relaxed coming to Argentina, and that's a problem for the others because when Marc's relaxed, he's really, really hard to beat.
Yeah, that's when he's at his most dangerous, isn't it? When he's in that flow state he goes into, and he knows. And I think the reference to 2019, which is hard to believe, it's his last time here. Obviously, it's 6 years ago, and because obviously he said he's been injured and
different world.
Yeah, COVID, all that stuff.
Different world.
Yeah, it's. When you think of the podium that day, I think it was Valentino Rossi and Andrea Dovizioso on the podium with him. So, yeah, both guys that were retired and stuff. So, yeah, I think everything you say is right. I think when Marquez comes into the weekend, the Aragon point is so relevant here. The dirty track, just how it's not saying he's a dirt track rider, but he thrives in these conditions. And I think who can get close to him is the real thing I want to look at. Is it going to be a repeat? Is it going to be his brother? Are we going to see maybe Marco Bezzecchi come strong on the Aprilia? Ayogura, even we'll touch about Pecco Bagnaia because it is a bogey circuit for him when you look at his results, and he kind of has hinted at it already after the Thai Grand Prix that he knows how strong both Marquezes, he actually said, are going to be in the next 2 rounds. How does Bagnaia become the closest challenger? Because he has an added factor in here with people who do like this circuit and bikes that like this circuit as well.
Yeah, I don't think he does become favourite, is the truth there. I think he has to come into Argentina and Austin as well, looking to just bank points. If he can be on the podium in both of them, that's a win. And you're right, this is always been a bit of a bogey circuit for Pecco. When we last race here in the wet race, he was running second and then crashed out, kind of unforced, really. Same in Austin as well. A couple of years ago, while he was leading, he crashed out as well. So these next few weeks will be the time for Pecco to just do what he can and make sure he doesn't bleed too many points to Marquez. It's a long season, 21 rounds left. There's a lot of points up for grabs, a lot of racing to be done, a lot of circuits coming up that are good for Bagnaia, and he'll know that, Jerez being a pretty good example. He just needs to get through these next few weekends. Obviously, he should be chipping away at the deficit he had in Thailand. We look at the official statistics, the official standards, and he was 2.4 seconds away from Marc Marquez, which doesn't look that big on paper, but when you actually consider the circumstances of that race with the tyre pressure incident for Marc and having to slow the pace down and deliberately riding off the pace to be behind Alex Marquez, we worked out that, based on those first sort of 6 laps before Marc had to do what he did, the average pace was going to work out that Pecco was almost 10 seconds behind Marc. So that's the reality.
Yeah.
And he does need to chip away at that. He is going to find more rivals there. Aprilia is generally a very good bike here. Marco Bezzecchi, obviously, won his first Grand Prix in Argentina and is very good at the circuit. And that Aprilia started life off well in Thailand. One of its weaker circuits. Bezzecchi was strong, top 6. Aigura was sensational for a rookie, and obviously maybe he might not be up there this time given it's a new track for him, kind of new conditions to find, so you may be looking at Aprilia's charge being led by Marco Bezzecchi on that front, but that is a good package all round. Alex Marquez is going to be really probably, at least you're coming into the weekend, minimum second place from Alex Marquez again, if not maybe can he take the fight to Marc? I think that's going to be tough. But yeah, Pecco does need to watch his back a bit more. It's yet to see kind of, Pedro Costa didn't have a great Thailand Grand Prix. He's obviously not raced here in a MotoGP bike, so that's a new thing for him in the KTM. And obviously Honda and Yamaha, low grip conditions tend to not suit those bikes, but the track layout for the Honda should kind of play into its favour. And Joan Mir was really, really competitive before he crashed in the Grand Prix, and there is a few more hurdles facing Pecco Bagnaia than there were in Thailand, and and unfortunately one of them is that his teammate's going to be strong still.
Yeah, I think if Pecco can come out of the weekend with, I don't know, say 2 podiums, if it's a second and a third, he would happily take that, judging by his comments after the Thai Grand Prix. You can sense that he's kind of thinking, not into sort of damage limitation mode, but it kind of is, because he knows that maybe if the weather plays up, if it's a wet race, for example, we don't know what the weather is. It looks like it's going to be dry from when I checked it, but you need sort of variables to maybe try and stop Marc at this stage. But even then, Marc is still good in the wet, and you're bagging on a mistake almost, which I said to you, he's got like a weird record around Argentina. Marquez, it goes, he's won. He obviously had that coming together with Rossi in 15. He won again, then crashed out the lead in 17. In 18, he went a bit sort of, I don't know what happened to Marc. He glitched out that day, so he did. In 19, he won. Obviously, he hasn't been here for 6 years, which I don't know if it's a factor, but as you look at it that way, you're thinking, geez, the last time you were here, we were on a Repsol Honda, and there was barely any aerodynamics in MotoGP at that point. No ride height devices or anything. But I don't think that'll be a problem for him. I just think about Bagnaia having a clean weekend. He needs a good Friday. I remember that, I think it was 2 years or maybe 3 years ago with 22, he had that really weird last sector. If you go back and watch practice, the Ducati was doing weird things with Bagnaia in that last sector, and he was losing all his time. He actually missed out in Q1, didn't get through to Q2. He just needs to have a clean weekend, and he didn't have it in Thailand, obviously, on the Friday where he was in Q1. He can't be affording to be on the back foot here, and I think if he does come through and gets 2 podiums, I think it's a great weekend for him. But like you say, is Alex Marquez going to be a factor, because got his first MotoGP pole position round here in 23. I think he was on the podium. Was he on the podium both races? I think he might have been, actually.
I think he was, yeah.
Yeah, so a circuit that he likes, obviously. Bezzecchi won the last time we were here, done the double. Took his first Moto3 win actually here as well. So, and then Aprilia was very strong in 22. I seem to think that Aprilia will be closer. I don't know who to, but I think they'll definitely be second best going into the weekend. I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think so. The Aprilia generally in those kind of conditions does seem to work quite well. It's got a really strong front end, good agile bike. So, I think you're looking at Aprilia being a step forward. I think Bezzecchi, with that kind of experience of the first weekend under his belt, he knows what the kind of weak point is, which is at the moment qualifying. He's just not quite sure, where the limit of the bike is yet. He's riding it more like automatically like he would a Ducati, and that's going to take a little bit of time to kind of get over. But where was he in Thailand? 7th on the grid. That's not really a bad kind of if that's the benchmark for when time attack's not brilliant, then
It's not bad, is it?
it's not bad at all. Yeah, a lot of the a lot of the Argentina weekend will depend on how well you get out the gate on Friday. Friday is going to be a really difficult day, it always is, because of the track conditions. If you can come through that in a good place,
Yeah.
then the job's almost half done at that point, because if you're on the back foot then going into qualifying, you're really playing catch up at that point. And that's something that Pecco spoke about in Thailand, was that he missed a lot of time in testing because he was chasing his tail with the bike. They kind of figured it out in the last day, but that then meant he was coming into the weekend on the back foot and really in delay, essentially. If you can kind of obviously skip that stage in Argentina and hit the ground running a bit better, then he can kind of mitigate those mitigate the losses he was having in Thailand. But yeah, in terms of who's going to overall challenge, it is really hard to see anyone breaching Marc Marquez again. Just just everything, all the analysis that we've done from Thailand just suggested that was going to be a much heavier beatdown than what was administered. And I think now that Mark's finally had that, I think he will be quite keen to just start stretching his legs a little bit and see what he can do. Where's the ceiling there? And over the next couple of races, I think we're going to start seeing that.
Yeah. I actually looked at the calendar and I was like, Aragon's earlier again this year, and you're thinking, my God, like he has a chance to really, like, as you say, stretch his legs, and like it's like almost like it's fell on his lap perfectly here. So it has, but I think that the Friday is so massive, as you say. Now it's so condensed with the schedule. I don't know. I think that he will come in and he'll just do what he done in Thailand. Yes, he doesn't have testing reference because you're coming in off a test, but does it really matter? Look at Aragon last year when it was dirty. He just he blitzed everybody straight out the gates, and I think he feels comfortable, and that's going to be the key for me.
Yeah, and it's worth noting as well that one rider that really struggled in those conditions was his teammate. We saw in the sprint that Pecco came away 8th in that sprint, and then in the Grand Prix
after the bad starts, and then obviously with Alex Marquez collision.
Yeah, he was kind of on course to maybe get on the podium, but that was kind of the extent of it. That was a real one of those weekends that you'll look back on as being quite crucial in his championship defeat to Jorge Martin that year.
Mm-hmm.
Being with Marc Marquez, having all that data, maybe there's something you can learn there from what Mark does, especially being on the same bike now. He will have seen what he did in Aragon, and maybe he's learned something. I mean, that'll be an interesting thing to keep an eye on.
It will be. What about we touched on Honda? But what about Yamaha? How do you think this goes for them? I think it's a decent circuit for them. I mean, looking at history, you can judge. Rossi won in 15, Vinales in 17. I think it's a track that suits pretty much all the bikes on the grid. So Yamaha, like you say, it's the grip, isn't it? And how they can combat that. If Anna Quadraro can kind of get the feeling back with the tyres. He kind of was a bit lost in Thailand, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, we go back to the normal tyre carcass on the rear, which should hopefully help, and some of the grip issues. But Yamaha will probably find the dirty nature of the track a bit difficult.
Yeah.
But if they can get into that sweet spot with the front end where they can really ride on the front, then that should help them. I think we haven't really seen the true form of Yamaha yet. I think Thailand was disappointing. I don't think there's any way of kind of dressing it up, really. We expected more and we didn't see that. I think Jack Miller was in a good position, and then he had the problem with the loose fairing, so perhaps there was a top 6 finish there for Yamaha that went begging. So it wasn't all bad news. I think it was disappointing to see where Quartararo ended up, but it does seem circumstantial in terms of tyres, in terms of maybe just that circuit in general has not really been great for Yamaha in recent years. So is Argentina going to be a real reflection? I'm not certain. I think if it comes away from it a bit more competitive in Thailand, then that probably is quite a good indicator. If it's roughly in the same place, and that probably suggests that, well, there is still some work to do, but you can also maybe think that the track is the problem there with the grip surface. That'll be true for Honda. Like I say, the fact that they came through that Thai weekend really strongly, despite all those same issues. They don't have traction really. They certainly don't have top speed.
Yeah.
And they were fine. Really, really competitive by sort of Honda standards at this point in time. So going into the next races, let's see. I mean, Austin's the one I'm kind of keeping an eye out for.
Yeah.
Austin and Spain really are the kind of next two races for Honda I'm keeping a close eye on, because those are both good circuits for that bike generally, and especially Jerez, when you've not got such a long straight, that power problem might not be such a big problem for Honda at that point. So yeah, I think Argentina will be an interesting one in terms of it'll give us a little bit more of an idea of where those Japanese manufacturers are, but obviously it is a bit of an odd circuit as well, so there will be some caveats to throw on top of that.
Yeah, it's really just a case of waiting and seeing, because you kind of had expectations from Thailand, and you think, well, you should have went this way. As you've said, Jack Miller was kind of the leading light for Yamaha, and he had a few issues over the weekend. Obviously crashed out of the sprint, did a good qualifying lap, in fairness, but then in the Grand Prix, the fairing hanging off, and he had to hold it in place essentially. Yeah, I hope the factory team can step it up, but it's a case of waiting and seeing with them. And like you said, the next two rounds after that, Texas should be good, RF should be good. So yeah, quiet optimism. Let's see what Honda and Yamaha can do. And I suppose while we're talking about just in general, we've touched on Aprilia. What about Jorge Martin? This week last week he was on social media kind of showing off his hands and wrists. I think he's just saying that, look, we're making progress here. Are we expecting him to be back for Texas? A bit ambitious, isn't it, obviously, with the injuries that he sustained?
I think it's a bit ambitious, yeah. Martin, I want to be back as soon as possible. I think Aprilia have already said they're not going to rush him back. They realise that. I think they've known from the start of the year that fighting for the championship is not really going to be priority number one. They want to get into position to fight for a championship. It's not about actually breaching that this year. And I think with obviously just the injury misfortune that he's had in such a short space of time, they're not going to rush him back and risk potentially ending the season completely with another injury. The complex fractures he's had to his hand, and his scaphoid, those are pretty big injuries for a motorcycle racer to have. And I think Aprilia will err on the side of caution. Austin's a really, really physical track if you've got injury and if you've not ridden the bike and you're not fully fit. I think waiting until Jerez, when you've then also got a test after it as well to really...
Yeah.
I think that's probably what we'll be looking at in terms of timeline. I'd be surprised if we see Martin on track in Austin. I think if he does come back, I think it will maybe be a bit too soon. There's nothing to gain from it.
No.
The riders frequently talk about Austin as being one of the most physical races of the year, and if you're in the state that you are, it's also one of those circuits that can bite. We've seen some big crashes there, and I think Aprilia will just be quite happy with what they've seen so far from its other riders, from Agura, from Bezzecchi, and we'll say, look, Jorge, come back in Spain, you can do the race weekend, and you've got a test afterwards. There's more time for you to really manage the weekend a bit better than, it essentially becomes a 4-day weekend for him, a 4-day test session instead of, trying to condense everything into the one weekend. So, yeah, we'll see how Martin gets on. I would think Austin's ambitious, and if I were Aprilia, I would just delay it until Jerez anyway.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think it's logical. Like you say, you don't want to come back, and I think about Texas, it's got that added element of the weather's always really hot, and it's like you don't know what that track surface is going to do sometimes. And like if you've been Martin hasn't been on a bike since what, start of February, really, and it's like everyone else is going to be dialed in. It's like, do you really want to be coming into somewhere around this physical circuit, as you say? Yeah, I hope he can use his head on this one and listen to Marc Marquez, what he said to him in that text message. Respect his body.
Yeah,
if you miss 3 Grand Prix, it's not really, doesn't mean anything. You can come back and you can be fine. So yeah, a good update on Martin. I think if it uses his head, he'll be back by Jerez. Even then, the extent of the injuries, don't really know how. People recover at different rates, don't they? And that's the thing. You can't really pinpoint to him. But I think if he uses his head and be smart, he can use that weekend in Jerez to come back and start his championship there. KTM, we'll end it on them. Weird circuit for KTM. The results are kind of just okay. I haven't been here in 2 years, really. Are we expecting a turnaround from Thailand? Because a lot of the issues have been kind of covered up by the riders, essentially, in the race. Bastianini saving his rear tyre. It wasn't a bike thing, it was a rider thing, and he was able to get a P9. Acosta struggling, as you said in the last podcast, he said the situation there's kind of, and what was the word he used? I can't remember. It was
it's a bad dramatic situation.
Yeah,
I think
dramatic.
what he said, yeah.
Yeah. So, do you think the KTM can have a better weekend? The track being dirty, does it suit them? Because Acosta was all right in Aragon. If you're just going to go off a memory from last year, he was fine actually.
Yeah, I think someone like Acosta can, with his feeling on a bike is probably, like Aragon will probably be competitive, but this tyre wear thing, we know Argentina has often been quite heavy on tyre wear, and I think this is an issue that has followed KTM around all winter, and clearly they haven't figured it out. The fact they weren't even able to figure it out for the Thai Grand Prix, having had 2 days of testing, is a bit of a concern. Like you say, Bastianini's form really was a result of him being able to save the tyres. So yeah, from that kind of perspective, if that's going to be the case again, then you can have a good Grand Prix, but it's very, very hard to know really where KTM is right now. 8th for Brad Binder in Thailand, almost 20 seconds off the win. It's not a great starting point. You're finishing behind Honda, finishing behind Aprilia. That is probably more likely where KTM is. I think Acosta, like you say, masks these things a bit better, and if he can stay on the bike, that's clearly been the issue, and that's something he spoke about in Thailand, was that this bike's much easier to kind of lock the rear a little bit and, just not have a settled rear and then be able to tuck the front. And Pedro Acosta's riding style really, really hinges on that strong front end, on his feel under braking. So yeah, it's the same answer we give every week on this podcast when it comes to KTM. It's just, we don't know. I think realistically, what we saw in Thailand is probably where we're at with KTM, because if you think to previous first rounds, the past few years, Qatar, Portugal, KTM were up there, after testing. Like last year, for example, Brad Binder had his best weekend of the year in Qatar at the start of the season. Typically, we've tended to see KTM have quite strong starts to the year and then they fade. They've had not a great start to this year, so I would suggest that is probably a bit more alarming than maybe Thailand would suggested. And Thailand didn't suggest that things were great to begin with. Yeah,
nailed it. Honestly, it's the same every week. I think that it's riders are going to make the difference here. And until we get into Europe, I think, until you can really understand what they're doing, it'll be the same answer every week for anyone that's a KTM fan listening. I'm sorry, I can't be more positive, but I think they're so hard to predict, and it's like you can't give a solid answer because you don't know. Like, who knows? They could be quick coming into Argentina here, and you just get surprised by it. But there's nothing on the form that suggests that it's going to change anytime soon. Yeah, that's really it for the manufacturers. I think prediction time for us. Who's going to win both races? Well, I think he'll keep it short and sweet. I think it'll be Marc Marquez that will win both, barring any disasters. Tire pressure problems. I don't know if... I think Ducati might have learned now, Lewis, that we'll maybe set the pressures a bit differently for Marc if he plans on leading every single lap. I think, there's no one that's really going to stop him, barring an issue, is there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just what we've seen in the past, what we saw in Thailand was... We expected Marc to be strong this year. I think Thailand showed that he's a lot stronger than we perhaps really thought about. And, even with Ducati kind of not taking a huge step forward with his bike, we know now that the factory riders have had a slight engine upgrade for this season, so there is a difference there now between the GP24 and the GP25. Not a big one. We don't know really what the difference is, but they've already taken that one step already with the factory bikes. We are expecting obviously new aero, new chassis to come in eventually. Where, yeah, you expect that Golf to just grow. So yeah, it's hard to see really anyone other than Marc Marquez winning this race. I guess a lot of it will also depend on how scrappy his brother's up, going to be, and also where Pecco ends up. Because if Alex has really got the pace and he's really up for risking, he wants a Grand Prix win over fighting for a championship, then if Pecco's not really anywhere in the picture, is Mark going to fight Alex as hard? These there are little things there that just keep the door open for maybe there being a slightly different result, but in terms of pure pace, it's really hard to look past Mark as not being the favourite and not being the clear runaway favourite either. Like, there's been a few times we've come to Argentina and at the end of Friday practice, FP1, we've seen Mark a second clear of the field.
Yeah.
Yeah. That when that happens, you're in for a
we're in for a long weekend.
Long weekend if you're a Marquez
Absolutely.
fan.
Exactly.
Or a factory Ducati employee.
Yeah. Yeah, you're spot on. And that's a good point about Alex Marquez. How's his mindset? Does he just want Grand Prix wins? I mean, could he get it? I think about it now. I'm like, well, that would be actually quite good to see these two have a proper scrap, because I don't know if he'd take it easier on his brother. I think now they'd just be at it. I think with your brother, and personally someone who has one, you don't want to let them win. So you don't. I know there's that love there, but I think you can almost push the boat out a wee bit more with your brother, and you can kind of get away with things a little bit more. But yeah, I think barring an absolute disaster, Marquez is going to do the double and extend his championship lead. The battle behind will be interesting. I really do think Aprilia will be strong. I think Bezzecchi's going to be absolutely on it. And I think he can challenge for the podium, so he just needs that qualifying, as we touched on. And if he can get a better start than he did in the sprint at Thailand, if the track is dirty, the grid could be dirty, who knows? And this could be a factor. It could be like an Aragon 2.0 again. But we'll wait and see. If you enjoyed the podcast, if you're watching on YouTube, tell us your predictions below who you think's going to win. And Termas, if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, hit that little bell icon to be notified for every episode we upload. 5-star review helps us out massively. And we'll see you for the review of the Argentina Grand Prix. Take care.